community. When you hear that, do you say, if that future came about, there's a place for me, I could live? It might be minimally bearable. I might grit my teeth. It is certainly what I would not want. But if that future came about, I would bear it. And in that sense, bearable is a tautology. Because it means you wouldn't, what's an opposite is what you couldn't bear. You would use violence to do. So if you would live with it, without resorting to violence, it's bearable. I don't mean anything more than that about it. Okay? And when vice versa, when I hear you talk about that, I say, if that future came about, I'd grit my teeth, but I would live with it. And until that question gets answered, not much is going to happen. That's so fundamental that we call it the peace question. So that is fundamental and has to be addressed. That answering of that shared future question does two things that's absolutely critical. It establishes a political domain. Because politics works on being able to lose, my friend. It means that I can lose absolutely and I still have a future that I can live with. If I lose, if I face a loss in a political situation and it gives me a future that I cannot live with, I will abandon politics. Okay? Secondly, it establishes a realm of trust. I don't have a lot of time to say about that. Wolfgang only gave me a few minutes. But basically, the definition of trust, which you could choose many of them, we use is the one that Russell Harden uses, means an encapsulated interest, that it is a cognitive judgment, that when I look at you, I see that my interests are enfolded in yours in such a way, encapsulated in such a way, such that when you pursue your interests, you'll do mine as well. I then trust you. Now, the way I formulated that is very close to the shared futures question, okay? That leads inevitably to the second question, the question of trustworthiness. So how can the parties trust each other to honor the commitments and take all of the intermediate steps toward that future? Now the problem with this is that for most of this conflict, you're now telling me you're going to do what you have said previously that you couldn't under no circumstances do. Okay, I just can't do this. Never would I be able to do it. And now you're telling me you can do it. What changed? Why should I believe you? And so this is, the parties are able to demonstrate in word and deed their commitment to take those steps. Now this is fundamentally a question of how do you get from here to there. And that is attended by three problems that I just want to briefly note. One, getting stuck halfway. That is that, and that's classically the kind of I have a gun in your head, you have a gun in my head, I say let's take the gun down. You say, no, I got a good idea, you take yours down, because both of us are afraid that we're going to get stuck halfway. That we'll take a step, but then you'll be left in a disadvantaged position, and we'll stay there until there's a time of greater trust. There's also a question about open versus closed agreement in the face of unequal power. I'm going to pass over that one, because the really important one, it seems to me, is agreements that mask disagreement. So that every agreement, every step, is an agreement that masks fundamental disagreements. The classic example of this is a ceasefire. It's present in the ceasefire that was negotiated between Israel and Hamas over the past week, that both of those enter into that agreement. There is an agreement about a ceasefire, but they enter into it on the basis of a different assessment about how the future is going to unfold. That Israel thinks it's going to unfold in one way, Palestinians thinks it's going to, Hamas thinks it's going to unfold in another way. It won't unfold in both of those ways. And so unless you can begin to work in that period of time to use the things that you can agree about, to begin to address the things in which you disagree about, that ceasefire or any other agreement is going to give way. So that even if you can get at the point where you can at many points, the majority of people say, here's the solution. That nevertheless solution at that level of abstraction does mask disagreements. But you did have to use that agreement to begin to address what those are and work them out. Okay? Three observations before I go on to the last two. Every negotiated peace agreement imposes losses and injustice, often, you could say always, unequally on the parties. Okay? So when you talk about there's going to be a negotiated agreement and it's going to be just to all the parties equally, it's not going to happen. Whatever that agreement is, it's going to impose losses, it's going to impose injustices. And the question is, how do we deal with those? Secondly, there are deep asymmetries that make reciprocity a problem. Okay? These things don't come equally. The way human beings have dealt with conflict is that they do it through a reciprocal exchange. That's the standard kind of way human beings do that. I give you something, I share a loss, you lose a loss of something else. Wolfgang says I got to go on. There's also, this gives rise to issues of humiliation, powerlessness, and injustice. Last two, loss acceptance. How can the parties loss? Each side will feel that the settlement requires real and painful concessions from them and gives them little in return. Their settlement requires no meaningful concession from the other side and gives them everything in return. There's an important there about the transparency, so that we believe this can be addressed to the degree that the parties begin to understand that the other side has also paid a price for the peace we're going to live. Finally, there's the question of just entitlements. Since both sides have different notions about what justice is, and to the degree that justice is getting that which I'm entitled, the other side is the embodiment of injustice, that creates a real problem. We figure that the only way to really address that is to invert that. You're not going to get a just peace, but what we can do is to lessen the injustices that a peace will impose. The parties need to work together to do that. It answers what we think are the more fundamental question, which is not, is this a just peace, but is this peace worth enduring the injustices that it entails? And you have to make the answer to that question yes. I want to just briefly note before going on that humiliation in all of this, and if you've been there, you know what this is. Humiliation is a tremendously overlooked factor in this thing, and that it involves the deep asymmetries of powerlessness, injury, and defeat, which the parties experience. Finally, I wanted to come to the thing and to say what this kind of mimetic thing would suggest. It would be a slightly different approach. The future of a shared question of a shared future, the need to address explicitly the place of the other. That's rarely done, particularly in the Middle East. It's not a question of trying to figure out what the solution is. Everybody knows that there's going to be a negotiated solution, what that is. It is perfectly legitimate to say, if that's the solution, I would prefer no solution to that solution. But that's going to be the solution. That's not the barrier. The barrier is principally that Israel does not think signing an agreement or reaching an agreement means peace. The Palestinians do not think it means a viable state. And so if you want to begin to address, you have to say how my vision of the future really does entail a viable, underlined 6 times state. And that's what I want. That's what I want for my future, the other thing. Also that I want there to really be peace. I'm hurrying, okay? The question of trustworthiness would be an emphasis on unilateral measures over negotiation. Let me get that go. The question of loss, acceptance is an emphasis on the transparency of loss, the log rolling those losses, because I know if that loss is actually there and I can see it, and you're willing to embrace it, you really mean this. Where if you log roll it, you can read these things in about 17 different ways. And finally, the question of just entitlements will give an emphasis on the ethics of responsibility along the lines that I heard Sandy talking about last night, over an ethics of rights. And so I think this is the kind of contribution that mimetic theory could do to what actually would be a positive intervention into the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Okay, we heard now the 5 contributions of our panelists, and I think there were many hints how we could forward. There were also a little bit tensions, which is important. Charles' remark that cover is too much into piecework. Byron showed us a piecework perspective combined with mimetic theory. Sheila gave a list of names. We could go on if we just invite those people for another 5 years and many more things. So I would ask you, do any of you have a question or remark to one of your panelists? And after that I would like to open the floor that everyone may address the problem.
Yeah, one